The explosion of mesothelioma and other asbestos-related illnesses in the U.S. and abroad has made such litigation a legal specialty all its own. Over the past 30 years, a number of trends in the U.S., a lack of federal government regulatory responsibility, greed on the part of corporations, and a lack of universal health care for all citizens, have converged to create the largest cause of legal action in modern history. It is worth considering that had the federal government taken its responsibility toward its working citizens more seriously by subjecting industry to stringent safety regulations and provided health care to all citizens, the amount of litigation would be a small fraction of what it actually is today. Sadly, the damage is done, yet the federal government and courts still exhibit a strong tendency to side with corporate interests. Fortunately, the few conscientious congressmen and a small army of determined litigators committed to principles of justice continue to fight for victims' rights to recover damages caused by asbestos exposure. A brief history. The toxic properties of asbestos have been known and documented since the days of the Roman Empire. The Romans were fascinated by the magic mineral that would not burn, yet could be woven into fabric like cotton or wool. Patricians knew the price of working with the substance. However, what the modern world knows as asbestos-related illnesses was called the slave's disease by the idle rich of Rome. The modern history of asbestos litigation starts in the late 19th century. After half a century of asbestos manufacture and use as a building material, physicians were starting to see increasing numbers of respiratory illnesses among those who worked with asbestos. By 1897, a medical study by doctors in Italy identified asbestos dust as the cause of an outbreak of respiratory disease in a community of asbestos weavers. The same cause and effect was identified in British asbestos factories during the first 10 years of the 20th century. By the 1920s, studies in the U.S. showed that asbestos workers were dying prematurely at significantly higher rates than the general population. And by 1940, it was clear that asbestos exposure was the cause behind such deaths. Nonetheless, this information was suppressed by corporations and the federal government for another quarter century. After a 1977 discovery of what became to be known as the Asbestos Pentagon Papers at the corporate headquarters of the Asbestos Manhattan Company, however, the truth could no longer be hidden. Accountability. Since that time, well over 600,000 court actions have been taken against asbestos manufacturers as well as companies who used asbestos products. Despite the usual efforts on the part of corporations to abdicate their responsibilities through manipulation of the legislative process, the right of victims to hold them accountable has so far been upheld. While there are many law firms able to competently represent a plaintiff in an asbestos case, it is worthwhile to do some due diligence. Because of the long latency period of mesothelioma, asbestosis, and other asbestos-related disease, it requires a great deal of specialized knowledge and research in order to build a strong case. Often, gathering supporting evidence is a challenge. For this reason, it is best to choose your representation from among a number of mesothelioma law firms. These firms typically have had a great deal of experience in asbestos litigation. They have already done much of the research and are very familiar with the tactics employed by the corporate attorneys. The fact is, successfully winning a plaintiff judgment in an asbestos case requires meticulous, time-consuming research and the testimony of very specific witnesses. As mentioned earlier, mesothelioma has a long latency period. Symptoms typically do not appear for anywhere from 20 to 40 years after initial exposure. In that time period, businesses go under or are acquired by other businesses. Memories become uncertain. Witnesses disappear. An increasing number of mesothelioma law firms are building and maintaining databases of information related to the asbestos industry, including digital archives of old documents, photographs, depositions, and court records, and examples of case law and precedent. If the law firm you are considering has access to such a database, it is a good indication that they will be able to represent you successfully. The best way to find a good mesothelioma law firm is to contact the Bar Association in your state. They can refer you to a number of qualified firms and individuals. The next step is to interview attorneys from at least 3 or 4 different firms. Before deciding upon legal representation, learn about the attorney's experience. How many asbestos cases has she or he handled? In how many of these cases did the judge find for the plaintiff? Will he or she be handling the case personally or referring it to someone else? Is he or she or the firm willing to represent you on a contingency basis? Will your case stand alone, or will it be part of a group action? Once you have the answers to these questions, check the attorney's references. Remember that monetary awards in mesothelioma cases can be very large, and thus pose a great attraction to less ethical elements in the legal profession. If someone in a pinstriped 3-piece suit and a $300 hairstyle hands you a card that says, "You may have $1 million lungs," this is not someone you want to have handle your case. Spending the extra time and effort to find a principled legal professional with your best interests in mind who understands asbestos litigation takes some detective work, but it is well worth the effort. Thank you for watching. This video was produced by Asbestos.Net, a leading resource on all aspects of asbestos and mesothelioma. Our priority is to inform victims about the devastating effects of asbestos exposure, mesothelioma, asbestos cancer, asbestosis, and other asbestos-related diseases, and to advise them with a wealth of information. Individuals whose lives have been touched by mesothelioma have numerous questions and concerns. Their caregivers and family members also need accurate, reliable information. If you or a loved one have been diagnosed with mesothelioma or asbestos cancer and need more information, we invite you to visit and explore the thousands of pages of oncologist-reviewed material on Asbestos.Net, to call our convenient toll-free number shown below and speak with a mesothelioma specialist, or to use the simple contact form found at Asbestos.Net to request a free copy of our informative books, custom inserts, and DVD. Asbestos.Net, information and help for patients and families.